In this video, I want to give you a full introduction to all the most common musical forms or structures in classical music. So after this, you should be able to approach almost any symphony, any sonata, any string quartet, or whatever, and have a good idea of how to follow it. I'm going to be looking from the classical period, that's Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, onwards, because that's when the function of musical form really exploded, and these are the guys who totally influenced musical form over the next 250 years. So let's start from the top. What is a sonata? This is not to be confused with sonata form. It's kind of confusing, I know. A sonata implies a group of pieces called movements. So in turn, a movement is a piece which belongs as part of a sonata. So the Moonlight Sonata has 3 movements, for example, or Brahms' Third Violin Sonata has 4 movements. For some reason, the word sonata is only applied to compositions for up to 2 instruments. So you'll get a piano sonata or a cello sonata, but when the group expands, we start calling them trios, quartets, quintets, and so on, instead of sonatas. This seems weird to me because really from the music of Haydn onwards, all these pieces are sonatas, just for more instruments. And in the same way, the symphony is really a sonata for orchestra. The concerto is a sonata for one or more solo instruments playing alongside or against an orchestra. So we get violin concertos or piano concertos or even double concertos for violin and cello and so on. Normally, a full-sized sonata will have 4 movements. The first is an important and typically dramatic movement, and this will almost always be in sonata form. Then there'll be a slow movement, and this could take any form, ranging from lyric forms to sonata form, just like the first movement. There'll be a minuet or scherzo, which will mimic, to some extent, the forms of classical dance music, and this gives a nice contrast to the slow movement. And the last movement will be a finale, generally lively, and it's often in sonata form like the first movement, but typically it'll be in rondo form. So you see that this sequence of movements provides a great opportunity for a lot of contrast and musical interest. They're not just writing one 5-minute piece which expresses one emotion, they're taking you on a journey which has been carefully sequenced to take you through all these emotional states before the final payoff, a bit like a well-crafted film. And this is especially the case from late Beethoven onwards, whereas Haydn and Mozart are closer to expert craftsmen with their sonatas. Late Beethoven onwards really gives us a carefully crafted sequence of emotional events. The slow movement and minuet sometimes switch places if the composer thinks that that'll make the sequence more dramatic. Now, I said that this is the full-sized sonata, but many piano sonatas, chamber sonatas, and concertos only have 3 movements. This is because they often exclude the dance movement, because the dramatic first movement, slow middle movement, and the lively finale provide enough great material on their own. So we'll look at these 3 kinds of movements first, and then look at the dance movement and other rarer forms that can appear in the sonata. So the first movement is almost always in sonata form. I said before that sonata form is the most important form you can learn. If you're going to learn just one, learn this one because it appears everywhere. I've made a separate video especially for sonata form, so definitely watch that if you want to get a better understanding of how great composers work and how to listen to a sonata. Onto the slow movement. This movement can also be in sonata form, but remember that in classical music, slowness often means bigness. It can be in sonata form even if the development is only 8 bars long, because of the breadth and slow pace at which the music unfolds. The composer could also recreate the feel of a sonata form with just an exposition, recapitulation, and coda, excluding the development. And again, this works just because of how expansively the music unfolds. It might not need a development to make its point. There are also many varieties of the ABA form which could occur. So this is one of the easiest ways to denote a whole load of musical structures. Each section of the piece gets assigned a letter. So the first section is A, the second section is B, and so on. And it's a given that B should have different material and be in a different key from A. And then we'll probably return back home to A. But let's say that when we return to A, the composer alters it just a little bit to keep things interesting. In that case, we put a little mark here to mean altered. So a slow movement could be ABA or ABA-BA or something more complex, but working along these principles. And as I say, this system is really handy for writing out all kinds of different structures. On the other hand, the slow movement could simply be concerned with beautiful melody and lyricism rather than structure, so it could simply be A as one tune and B as another. So the next form of importance to the sonata is the rondo, which is typical for the finale. Rondo, the clue's in the name. It consists of a melody which comes round and round again, and this recurring melody is separated by contrasting sections, which we call episodes. So if A is the main theme and the other letters are episodes, it'll typically look like this, where B and C are the episodes. Or it could be this, or this, or something, but the point is that the main theme comes round and round again. The main theme might just be a melody, or it might be a full section, but it's typically designed to recur in its full form, rather than be fragmented and developed like something in sonata form might be. Think of it like a chorus or refrain in a pop song, which keeps coming back in its full form. The first episode, so letter B here, often behaves like the second group of a sonata form movement, and so it might be recapitulated in the home tonic in the last stages of the rondo. The second episode, so C here, might be a new tune in a different key, or it might be a process of development on material new or old. The first return of the main theme, so A' here, is typically curtailed so that it can lead quickly to more development and keep things interesting. From what I've just said, you can see that the lines can get a bit blurry between sonata form and the rondo, but normally it's actually quite clear because of how the main theme keeps coming back. Also, the main theme in a rondo tends to be much more square cut than in a sonata form, and you'll rarely see something labelled rondo unless it's at the finale. As with any of this, the best way to learn is really to listen to a bunch of them. So those three, first movement, slow movement, and finale, are what you'll get in many sonatas. But in the full-sized 4-movement sonata scheme, there's a movement which does not normally admit any development at all, but is typically a dance movement, consisting of 2 complete sections which could exist almost independently of each other, arranged A-B-A, minuet, trio, and minuet da capo, a complete repeat of the minuet. Why they chose the minuet of all dances, I don't know, but it makes a great contrast to the slow movement, and it's not too lively to undermine the finale. The trio is called a trio because at one point it would be for only 3 instruments, but that didn't last too long in the classical era. Beethoven, in his Mammoth works, expanded the minuet movement into what he called a scherzo, meaning joke, though they're rarely very funny. He keeps the dance-like character but makes it all a bit more dramatic. In a few cases he adds a second trio to make the form more expansive, so it might be A-B-A-B-A, though as I said earlier, there's not usually much room for development in this movement. He'll maybe use different dynamics on the recurrences to add a bit of variety, but probably not much else. Finally, there are 2 other forms which might appear in a sonata, either in the position of the slow movement or the finale, and these 2 forms are radically different from any of the others we've looked at. The first is the fugue, which is very rare in a sonata, but is an incredibly important form in the history of music, and so I'll give the fugue its own separate video. The second is much more common, variation form, sometimes called theme and variations. Basically, you'll be given a theme and then a set of variations on that theme, and these variations will be in the guise of complete restatements of the theme, rather than the fragmented kind of development we'll find in other forms. In our typical developmental forms, like sonata form, we learn to recognize a theme by its melody, so we can easily hear when it's being fragmented and developed. But variations are not concerned with developing the theme, at least in terms of breaking it up and reconstructing it. To make a variation in the classical sense is to take the whole structure of a theme and then build a similar structure with a different exterior. Unlike with sonata form developments, in a variation you might not always be able to recognize the actual theme, but the overall structure will more or less recur, so you can recognize it as a variation. Think of it like lots of different houses which have very similar architecture, but with slight surface level alterations. The other thing to know is that the effect with variation form is cumulative. Each variation will build momentum on the last, taking us through all kinds of changes in tempo and emotion, and one of the main challenges will be bringing things to a natural and satisfying climax after all this momentum. Some composers even end their variations with a fugue on the theme for a final knockout punch. One last thing, I will look properly at fugues in a separate video because there's enough to say to make it worth doing thoroughly, but in sonatas you'll often find small passages which resemble a fugue with all its imitations, like this. This kind of passage is normally called a fugato, meaning in the style of a fugue, and you'll catch them surprisingly often if you're listening for them. So that covers all you need to know about the sonata and musical form, so that you can get started with listening to the masterpieces of classical music. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, then please do like, subscribe, share it, and let me know what you might like to see next. Thanks for watching.